Welcome to Women in Finance, the podcast series that features key women in the finance industry. They embody a vision, a career path, a function, and are giving a different perspective to finance by sharing their anecdotes about their backgrounds and their professions. I'm here with Katharina Dalka for Women in Finance. Hello, Katharina.
Hello. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. So, Katharina, you are a seasoned strategy and investment professional. You advise corporates and financial institutions with a really strong focus on technology, of course, and you specialize in complex cross-border operations with a special emphasis in Europe, in Africa, and in the Middle East. That's a lot. We have lots to talk about today.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it.
So first off, you're from Germany, and you're German, and you've lived in France for the past 15 years. Super interesting because I've also been here for, well, a little bit longer than that. But
Okay.
And I think that you were also in London for a while. So if you want to give me a bit of insight on your way to France, that'd be great.
So I left after I had my baccalaureate, my A-levels, to study here, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And that was pretty straightforward. It has something to do with the German educational system. I had intensive course English and French.
Mm-hmm.
My English was already pretty good because for Germans it's quite easy to learn English. My French less so. I had all the grammar, but as you know, to learn French, you need to be here. And so I moved to Paris to study, and as a side gig, I learned French because I studied French.
Great. And some people today will have the opportunity to listen to the podcast in English and then in French also, if they want to.
Yeah. You put me on the spot. It's like, this is why I wanted the disclaimer. So everybody knows that if I make mistakes in French or in English, neither is my mother language.
No, it's going perfectly fine, perfectly fine. So you've been working in the finance sector for almost 18 years now. What do you think is the most important lesson that you've learned in your career? And I know that's a big question. So
there is no professional development without personal development. And that was already clear at a very early stage of my career, but it's even more so prevalent since I have my own company.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely not possible to not question yourself and then expect the business to grow. That's not how this works.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you don't question yourself, very quickly there are a couple of walls coming your way, and then you have to. Otherwise, your business dies.
Do you think you can give me an example of how you've...
The relationship with money. So I have a professional relationship with money because I'm a finance professional, so that's that. And then there's a personal relationship with money where when you are an employee, there's a salary coming every month.
Mm-hmm.
So in France, this is pretty comfortable because firing people in France is close to impossible. And if you get fired, there's a certain amount of predispositions for you to be comfortable. Mm-hmm. It's less so the case in the UK, where it's much easier to fire people and then you have much less of help to get back on your feet.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you are having your own company, then all of a sudden you need to understand, okay, not every month there's like a regular income when you start. Mm-hmm. Right now, my business is up and running. But at the beginning, it was not like that. And then you need to manage that fear of money not coming in every month. Mm-hmm. And you need to learn how to walk next to that fear instead of running away from it. Otherwise, you stop having a company and you go back to your city job.
I like that, walking next to that fear. I like
that. It's literally what is happening. It's like becomes a whole person next to you.
I can imagine. Can you tell me something about the different challenges that the two businesses you have?
So both businesses are growing, which is a nice problem to have. Mm-hmm. But that brings scaling. And scaling depends on if you have an investor or you don't have an investor. Mm-hmm. If you don't have an investor like I do with Stellar One, then that requires careful planning of resources and investment. So every decision that I make in terms of where do I invest the money needs to really be thought out, because if I put too much money in a place where it's not going to prosper, it can be a risk.
And can you tell me an example of how Stellar One has helped a client specifically? So what exactly are you doing and how have you helped your clients?
So our clients are either investors investing in tech or banks wanting to work with fintech or tech corporates. And we provide them either with corporate strategy, so we don't do the operational part, we do corporate strategy, or proper transaction support. So when they have mergers and acquisitions going on, And then they work with us. And so often I say, we are the brain surgeons, not the GPs.
Okay.
So we come in when it really hurts. And like a concrete example is one of our customers was dependent on a deal, really dependent. And this was going straight into the wall. And so we came in and negotiated the deal through to success. And it was a really important deal for the customer.
Okay.
That is one thing. And then there's another example where a tech company came to us and say, okay, we have this competitor. We consistently lose contracts against them. We don't know why. This is our arch nemesis right now. Can you help us? And so we scheduled a workshop with all the salespeople involved, and we started to ask uncomfortable questions of, okay, why is this happening? What is doing? And so we had a whole game plan at the end of how to counter this specific competitor.
Okay. So I'd like to dig into a little bit about how you're leveraging AI. It's super interesting right now, and of course, a very hot topic, a trendy topic to talk about, but also just really interesting. So how are you leveraging AI, particularly to help sustainable development?
Okay, so that's on the Dydon side. That's not Stellar One Dydon. I'm a co-founder with 2 other people, and it's a software company. So we provide a software solution that caters to the ESG regulation that was put in place is still being put in place by the European Union. And it's a very stringent and very complicated regulation, like all of the regulations by the European Union. And when this came out, a lot of the banks and right now the companies that need to cater to that regulation didn't know how to do that. It's complex evaluation processes of more than 100 economic activities. And so we digitized the whole thing. And now we use artificial intelligence to do the entire assessment to see if, the company, the project is compliant.
Okay. And is there a convergence or a link between the 2 companies? Do you find that when you're working with the Stellar One, that they might have particular challenges that you can answer with the help that you have for?
So I have the tremendous privilege to not only be an advisor, but also a tech entrepreneur. So I'm managing, both sides every once in a while. And that is helpful because when we advise banks, for example, I know how it feels like for the fintech. I know that what I need to say to the banks so they can be able to work with the fintech. Or when I work with tech companies, so we have bigger clients, but I still understand the business challenges, like really hands-on because I've experienced it.
And what are the most exciting things going on right now, if we talk a little bit more about AI, and how are you kind of like using those things in what you're doing with...
So there's one big challenge in sustainable finance, which is the data issue, right? To do a proper assessment in sustainable finance, you need data. You need good data, and you need to have a good evaluation. And the collection of that data and the assessment of the data is almost impossible to be done by human beings. It would take so much time and so much effort. This probably would not happen at all. And so AI has the tremendous capacity of managing that data and evaluating that data on behalf of us human beings, and to provide the assessment that is required.
Okay. And can you give me an example of some of the outcomes of the assessments that you've made?
This is a very straightforward process, basically. The EU regulation is separated in several economic activities. So let's say the production of cement, right? And so for this production of cement, you need to have a specific CO2 emission. Otherwise, you're not compliant, right? And so our tool is literally telling you that. It's like, this is the emission that you are having when you're producing cement. You are compliant or not.
Okay.
It's as straightforward as that.
Okay. It's always nice when things are straightforward.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about a typical day for you? You have 2 different businesses that you're running. I imagine that you have employees, and that you have sites that you're working from, and that you have and investors and people that are looking to work with you. What does your typical day look like, and how do you manage your time? What's the secret?
First of all, Stellar One is my company. Dydon AI, I am with 2 co-founders, so I'm not alone. Okay.
Okay,
so,
all right. Just a third.
Yeah. Just part of it. I wouldn't be able to do both at the same time. I do not have a typical day, but I have typical activities, okay? So one typical activity is production, where really I'm sitting in a deal or I'm producing an analysis or I'm writing a document, whichever, that is full of content and that I provide to the customer together with my team, right? So that's one big activity. The other one is obviously sales. I go to speak to people, they come to speak to me, they tell me their problems, I write a proposal, I sign a proposal, and then I give it for invoicing. That's the two big activities. Then there's another one, which is the legal financial back office of both activities, of both businesses, sorry. And that is putting the insurances in place, doing annual reports, doing VAT declarations. I have help for that, thankfully. I don't need to do that on my own, but I spend quite a lot of time with accountants and lawyers in my life.
Okay.
Both as an operational and as the manager of a business. And then there is another big part, which is negotiations. And it's not only about mergers and acquisitions, it's also negotiating working contracts and commercial agreements. That's a huge part of my activity.
Okay.
I love this. This is my thing.
Okay. I was actually going to ask you, I'm wondering because, you haven't been doing this forever. So do you find sometimes that the things that you were doing before earlier in your career, which are different to the things that you're doing now, you miss a bit? Or are you just kind of like, no, I love what I'm doing now?
I love what I'm doing. I wouldn't change for anything in the world. It's just my world just got so much bigger in so many ways. And I got so much more mature emotionally, professionally in the 4.5 years that I'm managing businesses than what I've learned in the last 10 years before that. It was like this, like straight curve upwards. It was so impressive.
Okay, great. But I know also that like what you're doing is not limited to these two different companies. And you also founded March Women. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
So yeah, just a correction, I didn't found it. I was one of the first members.
Okay.
So the lady that founded it is Laura Brunnen. Shout out to Laura. We love you. You did a great job. Laura, if you hear that. And so she is a city lawyer, London city lawyer. She's worked for 20 years in the big law firms. And she was like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. And there is a problem of female representation in our domain. And the female codes of behavior that should take place in this domain actually not represented, so I want to change that. And so she started an association, and I joined very early, but right now it's growing and growing and growing because there was a need for the ladies that work in M&A to join forces.
Okay. And what are some of the common challenges that you found that you all have, and how do you help support each other to overcome them?
Well, it ranges from exclusion to discrimination to sexual harassment, like the whole spectrum of wonderful things that you can experience as a woman in business. And she wanted to create a community. First of all, we do business, so we're not gathering to have coffee and eat cake. It's like we do deals, we do business. So there are lawyers, there are advisors like me, there are accountants, there are other types of finance professionals like valuation analysts. So the whole range of professions is represented. And we do deals together. We work together. It's great to have a bunch of lawyers that I can call when I have an issue, work on the deal, etc. So that's the first objective. And the second objective is to change literally visually representation to see, okay, there are more than just two women that work in mergers and acquisitions. There are a lot of very competent professionals that do a great job differently than men. Not better, not worse, just differently. And that deserve to be seen.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about how you work with what we might consider allies in that context?
Male allies, you mean? They work with me.
I love it.
I think that's pretty much it. They work with me. And that's how it goes. Because ultimately, it's nice to find supportive words, but what really counts is the money on the table. Like, at the end, nothing else matters. And men coming to me and saying, I want to work with you because you're a competent professional and I like your approach to negotiations. I like your approach to business. I like your team, the way they are trained, the competences they bring to the table. That's how this should be. And I don't want to have a handout. I just want to, you know, be my team seen, or me being seen for the skills that we bring to the table. And my team is how competent, honestly. Because like, I look at what they're able to accomplish. It's impressive.
Yeah. You mentioned before that you said that you think that women in mergers and acquisitions work differently than men do. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I think that in terms of negotiation style, they are less conflictual. They're more in consensus.
Okay.
And so I'm highly trained in negotiations, and there's one thing that I've learned in all the training sessions that I had, and what I know from personal experience, generally you get better deals when you work in consensus, because the deal doesn't end when you sign it. Then people need to work with each other afterwards. So yeah, that is one of the biggest differences. And then I don't want to make this a general statement, because there are also a lot of very competent men working in mergers and acquisitions that I had the pleasure to work with, but there are also a lot of show-off. And for some reason, these people get away with it. And I'd rather work with the women because they don't get away with it. They have to be double as good as the guys, and they still don't get away with it. So there's also a question of skills, of availability of skills that I appreciate.
I like that. And I also understand that there's a course that's going to be offered, a beginning course on negotiation.
Yes, that's my next step. That's my next business step, indeed. So I realized that women, not in my profession, but in general, negotiate not at all or rarely. And I think that has something to do with the fact that women relate less to money, that they're less willing to speak about it, that they value themselves less in front of other people. And that bothers me. And I really wanted to change that. And so I'm creating currently an online course in negotiations for women, where I really want to create a space only for women, with women, where we can openly, first of all, speak about our relationship with money, but also be trained technically on how to negotiate, like with basic tools, and then have an entire conversation about discrimination and sexualization during negotiations, because that happens all the time, and give space to that to see how we can manage that.
Okay, great. I will like to sign up.
I'll let you know.
Sign up. Let us know how we can find that course and how we can sign up. That would be awesome. I'm also kind of wondering, I mean, we talked a little bit about the challenges that you're seeing in the context of the businesses that you're running and the organization that you were one of the first to join. But what do you think are some of the challenges that the next generation of women will face?
So I hope that they will face less discrimination than what my generation has experienced. I think that for us it's already better than the generation before. So at least it's moving into the right direction. But I've experienced some serious nonsense, let's put it that way, in my career already, and I would hope that they have to experience less of that. And for me, I think the biggest challenge will be a skill challenge, where it's not only for women, it's for the generation that comes in general, where there's fiercer competition with skills and education, and also who knows how to work best with artificial intelligence. There are right now professions that are prompters to ChatGPT. So I don't think we all need to be prompters, but we need to know how to use ChatGPT to a certain extent. Things like that. I think that is very important.
Okay, perfect. I think that one of my next question is basically, like, we talked a little bit about some of the challenges that women were facing, but why do you think there are still fewer women in key positions in finance than there are men?
Because women are still raised not to speak about money, not to claim money, not to invest. They're still being told by parents, siblings, society, that this is not a subject that we should speak about. That's not for us. That, you know, when I do my training in person, I'm going in front of women and say, I'm a woman of money. and then I pause. And then I continue, and like a couple of minutes later I'm like, okay, let me get back to that. How did this make you feel? And then like you get a whole lot of feedback about that was weird. I was like, okay, why was that weird? First of all, I'm working in finance, and yes, I like to make money. So there's a whole lot of that perception of, you know, women managing money, women investing, etc., where we are very far from equality yet.
Yeah. So you've lived in 3 different countries. So I'm wondering if you've seen a difference in the way that women approach money and how they think about money and finance, and maybe how they're raised at home or how they're treated in the office in those 3 different places, in France and Germany and the UK.
So I've not run a social study on education, so I won't be able to, like, I can only speak from my personal experience. I think that in Germany, in general, you speak a little bit more openly about money than in France and in the UK. This being said, the society is very traditional. There are a lot of women that still stay at home and raise the kids, while the men go out. Even in my generation, men go out and being the main bread earner, which is not the case in France, where a lot more women are part of the workforce. But on the contrary, France is a little bit more conservative when it comes to speaking about money. And England, I live in London, and there's London and there's England, which is very different. And so London is quite an interesting place because there are a lot of overachieving women in the finance place in the city. So there are quite a couple of nice role models. Money is not a subject that British society is speaking openly about, but London is a whole different ballgame. There's a lot of money in the city. There's a lot of money circulating, and there are a lot of powerful women. So that's very nice.
Okay. A few minutes ago, we talked a little bit about how women work differently than men, or how you've noticed and observed differences in the way that that women work and men work. What are some of the other advantages of kind of, I guess we can say, feminization of the finance sector?
Economic growth, turns out. So when you look at the investment landscape, very few women-led businesses receive funding, but when they receive funding, they overperform. And when you look at diversity statistics in companies, even the bigger ones, the more diverse, and it's not only women, it's also religious orientation, sexual orientation, etc., the better the companies perform. So there's a very tangible financial advantage to this. Interestingly enough, even that is not enough to foster more investments into women-led companies. So there seems to be a tremendous bias against women and money coming from male investors, even though the financial rationale is there. I find it quite impressive, to be honest, like in a bad way.
Yeah, it's interesting how, that bias or the way that you think about something can be negative if you follow it. I also
experienced that from a personal perspective. Often when I sit in negotiations, so often we are several people, like, you know, there are lawyers and guys around me, and most of the time it's mainly male. And so what happens during those meetings is I adopt a male code of conduct, right? And that can have quite some effects.
Interesting.
Men are very surprised about that then, and sometimes they don't like that.
Can you give me an example of something that
it's
you might
just
do?
Being very assertive about negotiations, just like, no, we don't do that, and just like, no, this is a hard limit, because in negotiation you have soft limits, hard limits, and you know, the bargaining zone, which is a little bit of, I'm starting to put words on it, a little bit flexible. And so when I say, okay, this is a hard limit, I'm not moving on that, but you can suggest something else, or I suggest something else. I already had experiences where that was not appreciated.
Okay.
Just holding my ground and saying, yeah, no, we're not doing that.
And what happens next? Do you find yourself backpedaling, going back into a way of acting that you think would be more receptive to that particular kind of person? Or do you find that that just makes you stand your ground more and you say, no, I'm gonna act this way, it's gonna be this way, and it doesn't work out the way I want then?
That depends a little bit on the situation. Backpedaling is probably not the right expression. I would probably put on the table more alternative options.
Okay.
To take out a little bit of pressure off the conversation. We're getting very technical here. Very technical. I would probably put more options on the table to get the pressure out of the conversation. What I don't change is my attitude, because I'm not aggressive, I'm assertive, which is a very big difference. It's something I very much worked on in personal development.
Okay.
And I am very respectful. I never lose my stance or like the way I discuss with people. I think that respect is very important in negotiations. I don't yell, just being assertive.
Right. So before you had mentioned that you have experienced some, not challenges, but I guess we can say discrimination. Can you tell me what kind of advice you might give to someone out there who's experienced discrimination as a woman or as someone who we can consider not in the majority, and what you would tell them to, what kind of tips would you give them to deal with it?
So in my career, I have experienced anything from sexual harassment in the legal sense of the term to discrimination to comments that were not supposed to be said. You know, so there's a whole range of there's a legal concern to it, and then there's an ethical concern to it, which is not quite the same thing.
Right.
And obviously when so the first thing, don't stay alone. The very first thing, whatever happens to you, is that discrimination, a comment that was not supposed to be made, sexual harassment, do not stay alone. You don't have to manage that on your own. Go talk to a friend for a start, but don't feel like it's your fault or you need to do this on your own. That's the worst thing. But then you get into depression and then I think there's a qualification to be done in terms of frequency, in terms of legal relevance, because unfortunately there is a legal frame to it. And once again, the ethical discussion is a whole different one than the legal one. And then if there's legal action to be taken, that really depends on the situation. Sometimes legal action is not the best outcome. If you have hierarchy that you can speak to, that you feel comfortable speaking to, don't hesitate. But don't stay alone.
Okay. Good advice.
And then it's also helpful to get some personal development if you can afford it, like therapy or coaching or things like that.
Right. Okay. And I suppose like the organization that you're involved in, you had mentioned that you're kind of like a community as well, finding maybe a community like this too.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't stay alone.
Helpful too. Yeah. So I want to know what motivates you to be so involved in three really big things like this that seem to be doing, you're doing really interesting things. Everything seems to be connected to helping people, like whether it's Stellar One that's helping companies to become better, whether it's what you're doing with the company that's working with sustainable development through AI, what you're doing to help women also with the March Women. Can you tell me who motivated you or who motivates you? A woman, a man, doesn't matter, whoever. Why or how do you find yourself doing these things that are so connected to making people and making organizations better?
That's an interesting assessment. Nobody ever asked me that question.
Really?
Yeah. I wouldn't say that it's about helping people. I have drivers that keep my ambition up, which is making money, because money gives me freedom to make choices. And that's very important to me. I want to contribute something to society, to leave a legacy in some sort, and then that is going via female empowerment or sustainable finance. The environmental issue is actually really something close to my heart. I don't speak a lot about this, but it's something that really matters to me. And so at one point in time, I had to ask myself the question, okay, you work in finance. How are you going to match this?
Well, I love that you asked that question because there are so many people.
Yeah, but because when you work in finance, when you're a banker, and
what can I do?
No, but it's really like, how do I make rich people richer? Which is not a problem per se. I have no moral issue with that. It's my job. I love my job. But like at one point in time, you also need to ask yourself the question, okay, but besides that, is there like another thing that you can add? Which
how can we
balance
a bit?
money's nice, but you need a little bit of a different thing. And then I really like the fact that I am never bored. Ever. There are things that are less pleasant than others to do, but I'm never bored. No day is ever the same. And I get to meet the most amazing people. I have the most amazing customers.
Okay.
And it's very challenging. Yeah.
I'm sure that that at these companies you have some people who are younger, who are just starting out. What would you consider to be the most important, or the two most important pieces of advice that you would give them if they're starting out their career in finance?
First thing is ambition drives behavior. And that's something that we use a lot in negotiations. If you reach for the stars, you really reach the ceiling. So set your ambitions high. And then it's going to inevitably drive your behavior towards that. That's the first thing. And the second thing is discipline is more important than motivation.
Okay.
Because there are times when, especially in my profession, but I think it's a little bit the same when you're also having a salary, there are times when you do things that are necessary but not pleasant. For me also, there were times money wasn't coming in and you're like, oh, this is not cool. And then it's the discipline that pushes you through. It's not the motivation.
Okay. I like that.
Okay. Happy you like that.
I do. Well, I think that I'm surprised that I went through all of my questions so quickly. Time just flew. Yeah, I know. It flew by. Time just flew by. And thank you so much for joining us. I really do appreciate it. I think that I can't even imagine being involved in two businesses and then having also what you're doing with the Marchman Woman. Also, it's amazing that you have the time to do it all.
I love this. This was great.
Amazing. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. I know that you've got a lot of things that I'm sure your day is not done. You're probably going to go and
I have 3 more meetings.
Do meetings and check emails and all of those things that you need to do. So appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having
joining
me.
us.
That was lovely.